So chapter 21 begins the most important week in human history. Jesus enters Jerusalem on his way to die on the cross for the sins of the world. This is what has become known in the church as the Passion Week of Christ, or the week of his suffering. And the Passion Week begins with Jesus entering Jerusalem, making his triumphal entry on what we call Palm Sunday. And this final week is really the climax of his ministry here on earth, culminating with his death, burial, and resurrection. Jesus came to die for the sins of the world. He came to give his life as a ransom for mankind. So everything in his life on earth has been building to this week. And it was the time of Passover for the Jews. Jesus was crucified during the Passover celebration. And I'm just going to give you some context to the triumphal entry. I know that it's a familiar story, probably to all of us here, but I think if we have some more context to it, it'll give us a deeper understanding of this story. Passover was one of the three mandatory feasts of the Jews, along with Pentecost and Tabernacles. When I say mandatory, I mean every Jewish male who was able to make the journey to Jerusalem to celebrate these feasts was required to do so. And so Jews from all over the world would make the journey to Jerusalem for the Passover. The historian Josephus tells us that in the time of Jesus, 2 to 3 million Jews made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast. And so all the fields and hills around the city of Jerusalem would be filled with tents and temporary structures where the pilgrims would stay during the Passover. It was like a big week-long camp out. The Mount of Olives was filled with tents, the tents of thousands of pilgrims that traveled to Jerusalem for the Passover. And as you probably know, Passover commemorated the delivery of the children of Israel from bondage in Egypt. God sent Moses to deliver the children of Israel out of their bondage, to set them free from the Egyptians. And during the time of Jesus, the Israelites were in a similar situation. They weren't free. They were under Roman rule and under Roman oppression. And so at Passover time, there was a heightened hope among the Jewish people that God would send another deliverer like Moses. They were in similar circumstances. And so there was this heightened hope that God would send another deliverer like Moses. In particular, the Jews hoped and desired for God to send the Messiah to set his people free. Even today, when Jewish people celebrate the Passover celebration, the Passover dinner, they set a place at the dinner table for the prophet Elijah. And they leave the door of their home open or unlocked for Elijah to come. And the reason they do that is because Malachi chapter 4, verse 5, the last prophecy of the Old Testament, says Elijah will be the forerunner of the Messiah. And so most Jews today also have this heightened hope that the Messiah will come at Passover time. And so try to get the scene here. Millions of Jews come. There's thousands of tents on the Mount of Olives. They have this heightened hope that God will send another deliverer, that God will send his Messiah to set the Jewish people free from Roman rule this time. And because of that heightened messianic hope during Passover, the Romans stationed additional soldiers in Jerusalem during the feast so that they could crush any rebellion or uprising among the Jewish people. And so there was a greater military presence in Jerusalem during the Passover. Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea, his headquarters were in Caesarea Maritima, but during the Passover, he would go to Jerusalem and stay in Jerusalem during the Passover in case he needed to deal with any issues that would come up. That's why Pilate is in Jerusalem, and he's there during the trial of Jesus. And so, needless to say, tensions ran very high during the Passover. There were millions of Jews coming to Jerusalem. They were worked up and hopeful God would send his Messiah to deliver them from the Romans. That put the Romans on edge, so they stationed more troops in the city. So there was a large military presence in the city. And it's in the midst of this tense scene that Jesus made his entry into Jerusalem and officially presented himself to Israel as their king and Messiah. Now, on the Jewish calendar, Jesus entered Jerusalem on the 10th of Nisan. The 10th of Nisan. Not Datsun, Nisan, right? Now, that date is significant. That date is significant because according to Exodus chapter 12, verse 3, that was the day Jewish people were supposed to select their Passover lamb for sacrifice. And so Jesus presented himself to Israel on the day the Passover lamb was selected. And the Passover lamb was selected and brought into the home on the 10th of Nisan and kept until the 14th day of the month. And during that 4-day time period, the lamb was inspected for any blemishes or defects, because the Passover lamb had to be without spot or blemish. Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the 10th of Nisan, the day the Passover lambs were selected, and then the following 4 days he was questioned about his doctrine. He was examined by the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the scribes and the Herodians, and they found no defect in his teaching. They found no flaw in his theology.